I don't get the where are we going calls all that often. I get the calls that are like, why can't our people see where we're going? Right.
So it's easier to look backwards than it is to look forward, but really just starting is the hardest part.
Here's the prying follow-up question, right?
Okay.
How big do you want Seneca to be? Are we going to get to the point where there's people who work for Seneca that don't get to interact with you all of the time? And do you kind of have to have them?
That's when you get executives that are deer in headlights that don't know what to post at all. Or when they do show up and post, it is the most stale cracker post that you've ever read.
Well, there's a delicious irony to the fact that you become one of the world's experts on teams and you don't lead a team yourself. Right.
Yes, sir.
And so then if you post about it, then they're just arguing with you. Right. And like, no good can come of that.
I'll push back and I'll disagree with that.
Hey, you're watching Just Press Record on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Zeigler, and on each episode, I invite not one, but two guests to join me for a conversation-style interview. These are smart, funny, usually a little eccentric, frequently a little weird, often very online friends of mine. And even if you don't understand what they have in common at first, just wait, because I've seen some common ground between them that I've been dying to ask them about, and just press record. The show practically named itself, seriously. So subscribe, like, comment below, and stick around at the end of the disclosures, disclaimers, and reminders. And, come find me, cultishcreative.com, at cultishcreative on Twitter, and by name on LinkedIn. Without further ado, throw your seatbelts on. Let's make it a record. Okay, I am pressing record now. This is the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm Matt Zeigler. You are watching Just Press Record. This is our first episode of 2025. I am so excited for this. Ignore the new background. I just moved. We got all the things going. This is the show where I take two strangers, I introduce them to each other, and we all get to participate, see what it's like, see what they're like, take some notes, and get to know them a little bit better too. Now, I've got the common idea for these two guests written down right here, and we're going to see at the end if they can guess why I wanted to pair them up. So no pressure, guys. That's the stakes here for this conversation here. But let's play with my network a little bit. Introductions are in order. Now, this first guest, I'm reminded of the great Dick Butkus, who said, when I played pro football, I never set out to hurt anyone deliberately unless it was, important, like a league game or something. In other words, I never set out to win as a professional for myself and for my team unless it's important. And this guest bleeds how important it is to play with those professional stakes, especially in his books, particularly Friend of a Friend, probably my most gifted book ever for the record, and Pick a Fight, How Great Teams Find Purpose Worth Rallying Around, one of my favorite culture books, should be said. This guest gets the value of a network with a purpose. He's a Birkin grab bag of luxurious communication techniques, the David Berkowitz of killer ideas, and less maybe murdery than that, he's the Birkenstock Standal of Grateful Dead level audience building, the one, the only, David Burkus. Say hello, David.
That's a lot of Burke in one in one intro. That's great. We like I'm appreciative that somebody else comes out. We plural, like as a family, we plural our name Burkeye. The Wi-Fi, if you're ever near our house, you'll know it because it's called Burkhaus, spelled the German way.
That's
so
awesome.
I have a huge appreciation for how much Burke you work into that. Well done.
I'm a little upset I didn't get a Commodore's Burkhouse reference in this one. All right. Well, David, I have to introduce you to this wonderful second guest. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I think that this reference is going to predate you, but I got so stuck on this writing this intro.
All right. It's all right.
Okay. In the mid 80s, Knight Rider, were you a Knight Rider fan at all? Has this haunted your life?
But I get it all the time. So I know what it is just from that.
This is what you get when you work with old people like me. So in the mid 80s, Knight Rider, the car's name is Kit. And like this guest here, this Kit had two problems on the regular. One being Kit was a demonstrably brilliant supercar. I am a Knight Industries 2000 with the 1000 megabits of memory and a 1 nanosecond access time. But the second problem being this Kit struggled to get its message across, this wonderful high-performance vehicle, and it struggled to communicate, but it always knew the vibe that it was aiming for to create with its audience. So there's this episode where Michael Knight, our hero, our protagonist, he's poisoned, and a helpless Kit, because he's a car, Kit can't help. He's trying to tell him bad jokes to keep him conscious. So Kit's like, when I was a kid, we were so poor. And Michael interjects, oh, you weren't ever a kid. You're a car. Oh, well, okay, I'll bite. How poor were you? And Kit says, we were so poor we couldn't afford cheese to bait the mousetrap. So we had to use a picture of cheese instead. And so what happened is Michael says, Kit, well, what happened? Michael says, what happened? Kit says, we caught a picture of a mouse. And that's a terrible joke, but it explains so much of what social media marketing and corporate messaging is these days. It's just abstraction. It's a picture of cheese trying to get a picture of a mouse, when really all that matters is the feeling we're trying to get between the communicator and the receiver, the sheer poetry of it all. This guest is a master of that type of kidding around, and let's not be petty, because she was an American girl, raised on brand promises. More Tom Petty, but at least I got an American Girl Kit Kitteridge references, and we're getting closer in the age. All right.
Brett, you snuck that in.
The Kit Kat giving CEOs on LinkedIn a much-needed paragraph break, the Kitspur of friendly ghostwriting, and all that in the kitchen sink of brand strategy. Kit Huffman, welcome to the show.
I appreciate a person that can put in a lot of puns. That was excellent. Thank you for the intro.
I'm here, if nothing else, for punning around. I want to start here. And David, I'm going to kick it back to you. What's your earliest and ideally your worst, you should be networking memory? Like, what's the first time somebody told you advice and be like, you know, David, you really should be out there networking more?
Yeah. I mean, it would have to be in college, like undergrad, right? Because it's like the easy career advice that you get, like guest speakers come into a class, or you go to one of those things for extra credit, in the evenings where people speak. And then they ask them like, where should I start if I want to get in on whatever? And they tell you networking, but like a 19-year-old kid is not going to suddenly show up at the local chapter of the American Advertising Federation, right? Like, first of all, you probably can't afford the entry fee, but like you're almost so out of your league, right? That it's not necessarily gonna work at all. So that's probably the first. I wish I could remember like a specific incident, but I do have empathy for how often it's just how often I got it and how terrible of an advice that is to give to a 19, 20, 21-year-old, right? I think there's a couple entry points where you can, like, usually these places you should be networking do like a college student night or a specific event, but like you can't show up to the regular stuff. Everybody's just going to look at you like, who is this person, right? So that's probably the first. Yeah, that's probably the first bad experience.
What about you, Kit? Something similar? What's the first real
I was kind of
experience?
laughing along with that because mine is a little bit contrary. So I am a big business nerd since forever, and I would be reading like business books in, like, I kid you not, middle school. Like, my teachers would just walk past me in the hallway and be like, "Why are you reading business books? You're like 12." And my first time, I think, properly networking was maybe when I was a freshman in high school. I had found this angel investing firm called Grand Angels Investing. They're based in Grand Rapids. And my mom helped me draft an email to their point of contact there, which is their head office woman, asking just, "I'm so interested. I want to be connected with investors. I'm literally 14, can't drive." They invite me to their annual pitch. They do a monthly pitch meeting with potential new investments. They invited me to come. I went for pretty much all throughout high school. My mom would drive me to their annual or their monthly pitch meetings. I got placed with a mentor and I just kind of sat next to them. They asked me my thoughts on some of the investments, and we just kind of I'd swap notes with my mentor, and they invited me just to kind of more and more things. But I was a 14-year-old in the room full of angel investors.
Okay, so you are the one, like your story is the reason people give that advice to everybody else.
I guess
And I
so.
feel
And
like now I
I'm
have to clarify that, like, okay, be like Kit, but most people aren't Kit.
And I
feel
feel
like
bad because it's such a nerdy freaking thing to do. Because I remember I was in college and would get all that like kind of advice too. And just kind of like, what do you mean? Like, go in and network. And it just I felt like that step in college when you were receiving that advice felt very like, how do I do that though? And what does that look like? Because it feels very fake and holding your hand versus I think proper networking is really just, I'm really interested in this. And I want to be connected with you. And I think that's really what it is and what's missing in that messaging and what you get when you're in college.
you were 12 years old reading business books. I write business books now, and I didn't know they were a thing when I was 12 years old.
You
right?
had a middle school audience. Yeah.
You got to land with that middle school demographic. Wait,
Yeah.
Your mom helped you write the email. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. She helped me just like proofread an email. Yeah.
And I think I know this too. So talk about, because your dad, I've heard you talk about your dad before. your dad was a bit entrepreneurial and not traditional. Like he leapt a field to make his move. Can you tell David Burkus the story of your dad for a second? Because I think he'll really appreciate
Yeah.
this. And I want to talk about
Certainly
both of
doing
your
his
parents
homework.
and the influence.
Yeah. And my dad used to work for Disney this is when we lived in Los Angeles when I was a kid. He was one of the oldest people on his team, one of the only people married, the only one with kids, and he was maybe mid-late 30s at that time. He was just like, absolutely screw this. He quit his job, and then we moved to small town Southwest Michigan, and he opened a bowling alley. So an industry that is
you do.
yeah, like you just do. You quit your marketing job at Disney to go open a bowling alley in the Midwest. So he wanted his criteria for opening a business was I want it to be slow in the summer, busy in the winter, and have a massive marketing opportunity. So bowling alleys are typically passed down from like father to son or just generationally. So they don't really care too much. The person inheriting it maybe isn't that invested in the business. It's just something they're just doing passively versus you come in with that business mindset. How can we kind of like build this up? And most of that then is the marketing. How do we just bring people in kind of constantly and then slow in the summer? It's because he wanted to spend time with his family.
David, what about you? Do you witness anything like this as a child, or is this you like me? Like it's way past middle school till you start to learn how to.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, like certainly my dad didn't open a bowling alley. I don't even know that we ever went bowling. Actually, this is a total aside. The closest bowling alley to our house was a candlestick bowling alley, which is a thing.
It's fake bowling.
Interesting.
Do you even know what that is, Kit? Do you know
I
what
don't
candlestick
know.
bowling? I went to New England.
It's like a Northeast thing.
I was appalled.
I didn't know that wasn't normal bowling for like the first 2 decades of my life, right? Anyway, no, my dad was like, let's call him an entrepreneur for hire, right? So worked for Digital. That was a company back, before email, there was this computer company called Digital. The only thing that exists now was the credit union that was started for their employees. They're still in business, but the company itself is gone. And when they were downsizing, he essentially was an entrepreneur for hire. There were 2 or 3 doctors who had a business idea. They were all worked in elder care, and they had this business idea that they didn't have the time to actually implement on. So they were basically like, they knew him through the network, right? And they basically said like, what if you do it? What if you start the company? Like, we'll fund it, but you start the company, right? So it was really interesting because he was very, very entrepreneurial. Like I remember I interned there 2 summers at a college. And at the time they were probably 40, 45 employees, right? But I remember when it was like, he did it out of our office in our house, right? So watching it grow to that whole thing was kind of cool. The other interesting thing is I happened to be interning when he got fired. Well, I shouldn't say fired because no one in the C-suite level gets fired. He got asked to resign. Essentially, the board wanted to lend itself money through a different, like his company was profitable. Most of the guys were investors in another company, and they wanted to basically have one company lend money to the other, which if you're a publicly traded company isn't legal, but when you're privately held, like you can totally do that. And so they wanted to do it. And he was like, absolutely not. Like I built this thing and made it profitable. We're not going to take our profits and sink them into this other thing. And they basically like do it or you have to resign. And he was like, all right, I resign. It's really funny. So I remember like being there. Right. So probably the biggest lesson, I always sort of appreciated the idea of building a business from scratch, but I also appreciate like, don't do it with other people's money because then you don't own the thing. Right. So I look at what I do now and it's physically impossible to separate me from the business, which is the upside of which is I'm always in control. The downside of which is I have nothing to sell, like a bowling alley at the end of it. So I may have applied his lesson too specifically, but I've never sort of forget that really awkward car ride home the day that it was like, when are we going to work tomorrow? Well, we're not.
Did your internship cease with his resignation?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, certainly I didn't go back to the office after that.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was weird. It was an odd internship. This is a totally different life story. Other than that, the only other place I worked until after I graduated college was the same supermarket in the Northeast. In New England, there's a chain called Market Basket. There's actually a brilliant book in the time all of their employees who were not unionized went on strike because the board fired the boss and everybody loved him and the customers went on strike too. So I worked there from like 14 years old all throughout college, except for like I'd come back every summer and say, hey, here's my gig. Except for one summer, the only gig they had for me was like nighttime stalker. Like we'll put you in this place at 10 p.m. and you have to replace everything by 6 a.m. But they only wanted to hire me on the weekends. And so it was like, well, that's not enough. Like I have all summer. I'm back in the day when college students used to work all summer and then not work during college, right? That was what I did. And so it wasn't enough money. And so he had somebody went on maternity leave and I just filled in for them. So, but then that happened and then I was just back to being a stock boy. So yeah, it was an interesting experience, interesting summer.
Kit, did you just send emails with mom, or did you work at the bowling alley? Did you do any of this
I
stuff?
did. That was my
Shooting? Were you
I
a
did
shoe
not spray the shoes, but that was my first W-2 job, was working at the bowling alley. I was a birthday party hostess. So it's essentially coming an hour before a kid's birthday party, setting everything up, giving the parents and the family like a lowdown of what's going to be going on. And then kind of getting food orders, helping the kids get their shoes on, making sure like mom and dad can be very present and not managing the party. Like I'm taking care of the party, and then clean up and everything afterwards. And then when I was old enough to waitress, then I moved to waitressing. So that's maybe when I was 16, waitressing. That's what I did all throughout college. So 14 to 18.
What about in college? Like and Kit, stick with me on this. What'd you start
I
doing in
had
college for money?
few jobs. So I first started working as a coffee shop. I was a barista, and then I moved up to our student supervisor. So essentially the concept of that chain's manager, so managing other students. I started a middle school cross country team at this local charter school. That was their first, they didn't have any sports teams. I ran all throughout middle school and high school. I then started that program there, and that was really kind of special and cool. And also, how the heck do you start a middle school, I don't know, running program? So I did that for 2 or 3 years. I interned with the Adventure Travel Trade Association. I worked directly with their their executive director. So helping her take notes, working on some bigger projects. And one of our projects that I worked on with one of my intern partners, it was the first ever, bear with me here, baseline survey in the adventure travel industry on climate action. So what are people doing, providers doing in the adventure travel industry against climate action? So are you carbon offsetting? Are you reducing plastic? Are you educating your guests? The first baseline survey, we sent that out to all their members, and Intrepid Travel actually bought the rights to that survey. So it was an unpaid internship turned paid after that, which was very cool and very nice. They're still running that survey, so that feels like an impact there. I was an au pair in Spain, unpaid, but that was something I did. And then I started freelancing when I was 20, right before the pandemic hit. And that was Instagram, Facebook content marketing. One of my first clients asked if I did LinkedIn content creation. I said yes. And then I kind of just became one of the first LinkedIn content creators for executives, which it's pretty big now on that platform. But because of that, I got brought in and I worked for 2 marketing agencies while I was still pursuing my marketing degree, my undergrad marketing degree.
That's
So
wild.
that's my college work resume right there in a nutshell.
College up to almost now. David, did you keep, besides the grocery store thing, were you just
No,
wildly
like
experimenting?
I put mac and cheese boxes back on grocery shelves. That's what I did. Wow. Well done. Yeah, no, actually, that's it. I did not. I mean, my career was weird. I didn't take any real steps towards what would become my career in So I went to undergrad as an English major. I literally did not know business books existed until I was in college. So, we're total opposites there. So when you're 19 years old and all you know is fiction, you think you're going to be like a novelist. I actually realized, I was thinking this like 4 minutes ago. I did go to a young writers conference when I was in high school, which I would have counted as networking, I guess, if I were paying attention.
Yeah.
If I were paying attention, I would have kept in touch with Dan Brown, who had published like 2 books no one had ever read and now is like the most famous novelist ever. And we did trade like 2 or 3 emails after that conference. And then he exploded, and I put mac and cheese on grocery store shelves. Um, I graduated college thinking, hey, this stuff around, I like narrative long form journalism. I like science writing. I like social science writing in particular. This is like early Gladwell articles are coming out. And
Mhm.
I think Tipping Point came out after I had already graduated, but you could read those type of articles. It was like, I want to do that. Um,
Mhm.
the biggest, most significant thing that happened to me in my undergraduate life was I met a girl who wanted to get married and wanted to go to medical school. And I thought, okay, well, let's do the one before we do the other. Cause if you go to med school, you're going to meet some other doctor person. And there's my window has closed. So we got married in the summer between graduating undergrad and starting, and so I got bored very, very easily when med school started, because when you have a spouse who's studying law school, med school, anything like that, you're like, if you don't want to go on a study date, you don't go on dates. So I was like, well, I like work psychology. Let me start a master's program in that, just to learn about this thing that I thought I wanted to write about. All the while working in pharmaceutical sales and marketing, just to pay some bills and what have you. So yeah, no, I didn't really take any positive steps towards what I'm doing now until long after college. So I don't know. I guess if people are listening to this, there's still hope. You don't have to be Kit and like be networking your way into venture capitalists by 12 years old. I honestly don't even know what I was doing at 12 years old. I was trying to crack a joke there, but I truly have no clue what I was doing. Watching professional wrestling, I think that's what I was doing at 12 years old.
A solid backdrop and competitive with hanging out in bowling alleys, might I just add.
Actually, yeah, no, that's true. There's an overlap there.
There's definitely an overlap there. Because I think I was hanging out at bowling alleys and talking about professional wrestling when I was 12. David, this is probably a good time. Why don't you just tell Kit what you're doing today for a second? Let's trade on.
Yeah.
How do you describe?
Well, so I already hinted at it, and so
Mhm.
I write business books.
Mhm.
Probably would have read some if you were 12, if I were that good at starting in my career, but I wasn't. That master's program that I was telling about actually turned into a PhD because I continued to get bored. And then I ended up teaching in business school here I live in Oklahoma, but here for
Mhm.
10 years, including writing like Future of Work and Trends book. I wrote a book about networking. I wrote a book about network science that just happens to be useful to people who are looking for a more authentic networking
Mhm.
plan. And then some of the future work stuff involved remote work. So you can imagine I got very popular in 2020. And so in order to kind of meet the demand for, hey, our whole team has been remote, how the heck do we still feel like a team, what have you, I stepped away from the university. And so now all I do is work, giving talks or running workshops for leaders and teams around everything I learned in organizational behavior. So actually I do the same job. I still lecture people. I just do it for a lot more money to people who are actually doing the work, instead of people
Mhm.
hoping to do the work one day by studying the work now. So yeah, that's what I do.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Tell David what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so I am building a personal branding agency that collaborates with executives and founders to help them build and leverage their personal brands. So, what that really looks like is LinkedIn content, newsletters, articles to help them kind of build up that authority, maybe win new opportunities, win clients, build their just public personas and rapport there. And move to New York. Gosh, it's been almost 2 years now to kind of really see if we can't get this thing off the ground a bit more.
Oh, so you do everything that I had to learn how to do with like wasting 10 years and
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. And it's funny because you're talking, and I'm like, a lot of our clients do kind of what you do, where it's the writing books, the speaking kind of things. So I'm like, I know an odd amount of that side of the industry decently well. So I'm going to be doing some homework on you after this to see what's going on.
Love it.
I'm banking on that.
Yeah.
When you hear that and you think about the David out there as speaker and somebody who has this totally non-linear path to life at this
Mhm.
point, but now has a successful business, has a bunch of great books and people like me saying nice things about him on the internet, and now they're useful. What do you like? What in your brain is already firing off? Like, I want to know these things about what habits or practices or ways David presents himself to the world. What's firing
I
in your
love
brain right now?
what was the thing that was kind of pulling on me about 30 seconds ago to a minute ago is what is that through line? Because I think that is what is most interesting to me. So you're talking about getting that master's degree program. It seemed kind of just that I'm doing it because my wife is studying and I just want to be doing something. But it sounds like that master's degree program really set you up for what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it absolutely did. Absolutely did.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say this, the through line for the first like if you start, depending on when you start, you could say I've had a 20-year long career at this point in my
Mhm.
life, right? That's probably generous. It's probably 18, but whatever. We'll round up so that I look older and more mature and that I understand Knight Rider references, we'll pretend all of that. And, I would say the first 10 years were like intellectual ADHD, right? Like all I knew about orgs, if you want to know the true story, I actually got accepted into an MBA program and never went because all of the classes looked boring. And so then I
Mhm.
started looking around the same university, like, is there some other program that actually looks exciting? And that happened to be org psychology because that looked like all of those cool long form pieces that I was reading. And I was like, okay, that'd be fun to do. Right. And then did a bunch of different stuff. Like probably the only thing that really I did differently than a lot of traditional academics, because I wasn't in this to become a professor. Now, accidentally, I set myself up to do it better than the people who were really, really trying. They were really, really trying by writing dense academic articles to get read by 13 people. And I was like, hey, what if I started a podcast and I interviewed Daniel Pink and Bob Sutton and all of these people, right? And what if we started writing for a bunch of other publications that were practitioner focused instead, right? So I did all of that. That led to a book, the first book, which was around creativity and innovation, truthfully, because it was one area I was interested in, but also because I was 28 years old when I got an offer for a book. And I'm like, you can't write a leadership book at 28 years old unless you're like
Mhm.
a military officer, right? Like you don't have no one's going to take that book seriously, right? Um, Even at 28, they might not, right? Even if you were a
Mhm.
military officer. Um, so we wrote a book about innovation because anybody can write a book about creativity, right? Like a 12-year-old could write an
Mhm.
interesting book about creativity. So that's why we did it. The next book was sort of future of work because it answered the question of like, okay, what does a creative workplace look like? What are the policies and
Mhm.
procedures of the company? And then I took a huge detour, which is I think how Matt connected to my work, which was like both books had a little bit of network science in them, right? But I was just fascinated with this, and it was really an excuse to read more of it myself, right? It was to go like
Mhm.
instead of getting another master's degree in network science, I just signed a book deal, and then I had a year, and someone else paid for me to go study, which is actually a great strategy if you can afford it in life. And then it wasn't until COVID when, again, in that future of workbook, I had some stuff about remote work, and it was actually the publisher. It was a lot of people reaching back to me for workshops or just, can you do a webinar with our team, or can you just jump on Zoom and help us, right?
Mhm.
And then it was actually the publisher of that second book that said, remember that chapter? Could you make that chapter like a whole book? And I looked at the market and I told him, well, the only thing that's already missing in the market, there's how to run an entirely remote company books. Those are already out there. Jason Fried and David Hannemeyer Hansen and those people. And there's tons of how to be productive when you're a solo working from home. So the only thing people aren't talking about is teams. How do you make a remote team feel like a team? I'll write that book if you're interested. And they were like, great, let's do it. And that was sort of the moment when, so now we're like 10 years, well, more like 14 years in. And that was sort of the moment where I look back and realized that through line, to use your term, was actually
Mhm.
sort of that team, right? If you think about creativity and innovation, the number one highlighted sentence in that book, according to Kindle, is creativity is a team sport. Most of the policies and procedures in the future of work book were about building better teams. Even the networking book, Matt, the second half of that book is all organizational networks and teams, not professional. Nobody reads that half. Everybody reads the first half.
Mhm.
That so that was thanks. So that was when I sort of realized that through line was kind of teams, and that's what I've sort of doubled down in. Let's call it in the second half of this 20-year career, has been that. So if it's related to making a team work better together, odds are I've read it, written about it, and hopefully claimed credit for some brilliant insight around it. So yeah.
Interesting. How did you kind of find that was your specific interest? I mean, you were talking about early days, Malcolm Gladwell, that was kind of inspiration, but I feel like there's the genre of business writing but you're so far down the funnel on something narrow and niche. How did you slowly chiseled your way down, or
I
what was
mean,
that process?
yeah, you just look back. Like I
Mhm.
totally could have used some sort of content strategy person in 2012 when I really started all of this stuff, right? I could have used
Mhm.
exist. You were your mom was probably emailing major investors when that
Yeah.
happened. Oh, but because I just followed whatever was interesting to me.
Mhm.
It wasn't until I had like a 10-year long body of work that I was like, huh, everything that's interesting to me seems to have this one thing in common. maybe I should drill down on that, right? So we didn't really discover that until about 4 years ago, right? Like, and now you hear all of these different personal branding people, because again, this is half of my business. I have to learn all this stuff too
Mhm.
about it. Oh, you need to have like 3 or 4 content pillars, and then maybe like your sidecar personality, like the fact that you love pickleball or whatever, right? And you have to
Yeah.
mix up your number of posts and this and that. It was like, I didn't do any of it. I just wrote about whatever the heck seemed interesting. And then after a decade was like, the same couple things just keep seeming interesting to me. I guess I should spend more time on that. And that's how it went.
Mhm.
Kit, you're not on the clock for this, but I'm just curious. So you hear him put
Okay.
that through line together and communicate this.
Yeah.
Like, what jumps out at you besides the non-linearity of it all, but that through line as he communicated it? What's powerful about that for you?
Well, I think it's just that when you have a full body of work and be able to reflect back on it, that's way easier to do than when you are starting from scratch. Because a lot of my clients, when they come to me, it's usually that they want, again, like new clients. They're maybe going for big investors. So they need to have that clarity right now. But when you have 10 years of work to look back on, and that's kind of like your legacy or your portfolio, you can like very clearly see that. But it's that starting from scratch of like, where do I even begin to carve into this? Where, like, that is what's really intimidating. And what I always say is the biggest step for clients is like, it is just starting. It's going to know that your work is going to look a lot different your first year than it is your second year and going forward. And I'll show them examples of like evolutions of different thought leaders. Like the one that I like to tie back to is Mel Robbins, for example, and her through line, where she started as a lawyer, went to law school, then she was a CNN commentator. And then on a lot of those things were law. And then which really set her up to be what she is now as this thought leader within leadership, but just showing up so authentically and so powerfully on camera. All of those are just her through line there is really powerful. So it's easier to look backwards than it is to look forward, but really just starting is the hardest part. So that's kind of my takeaway that I saw from that.
Well, how do you, and that's the thing, right? How do you look backwards, forwards, right? Like you've got
Yeah.
a new founder of a new company.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to write me LinkedIn posts that get me demos, right? That get me people commenting and asking for demos. Like, where do you start? Because the worst thing in the world is to read like somebody posting always about their company all of the time. So like,
just the typical LinkedIn posts. Yep. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
Very familiar.
yeah, like what parenting 3 autistic children taught me about B2B sales for SaaS
Yeah.
company.
Yep.
Go-
We're all, no one loves those
Right,
LinkedIn
yeah.
posts. So my kind of process with my clients is I need to get to know your business. Like I need to get to know in and out of your business. That has to make sense to me. And then I like to go back and I interview my clients on your early career, childhood, your kind of middle career, and then where you're at now and looking forward and maybe in your industry. That gives me a context of who you are, values, seeing that through line. And then I go really hard into getting to know who are we talking to? Why are we talking to them? Why do they care? What are the solutions for your business? What does that mean for them? So all those kind of typical marketing things. And then from there, looking at what is the goal of this personal branding project? So for example, are we trying to position for investors? That's going to look a lot different than if we're trying to get people booked for demos. And it's going to look a lot different than if we're trying to get people to subscribe to your newsletter. Either way, though, how I look at it is what is the one action that we want our audience to take from LinkedIn? If we want them to subscribe to the newsletter, we want them to we want them to one, follow you. We want them to then go onto your profile and we want you to then subscribe to your newsletter that's linked on the top there. If it's booking demos, we want booked calls. I don't care how many likes, how many, whatever it gets there. That's important. Yes. The metric there is how do we get people to book calls? And so, or investors, we want to look good in front of investors. So when they show up and look at your profile before you show up to that meeting room, you look clean, professional, put together, and that positions you better when you step into that room. Those don't maybe have a lot of metrics, but if you get checks in the bank, that is a good metric to look at. So it's kind of looking at what's the end goal, and that final step that we can take them to LinkedIn, and then how do we get them there through content?
Now, okay, here's an obvious and super important question. If you're working with a client whose goal is to get investors, are you writing the emails to the angel investment and VC companies, or does your mom still do that?
Mommy does not still do that. I have partnered with PR agencies So this is really a part of a much larger comms project. I've just got onto a project for a company that's looking to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Part of that piece, I'm coming in just with this PR team, is to help them just zhuzh up their executives, identifying which executives should have that public persona and what each executive should be talking about. So compliance or legal or marketing or the specific industry, how the founders should be showing up, and them kind of owning their own channels.
That's awesome. But you are missing an amazing opportunity to come full circle and put
To just
more
full
parents
circle and write the
your
emails.
food.
I'll leave it to the PR team. To be send them an email.
I'm actually really curious about this. So investing money, obviously booking demos or what have you. Do you ever work with clients who are like, hey, we're trying to position our company for sale for the same thing? Because I feel like there's a huge, this is just me nerding out,
Yeah,
huge untapped resource in like
huge.
founder brand when we're actually trying to exit or actually try and sell it to private equity, et cetera. And I almost feel like that'd be easier than when we're trying to get investment money, right?
Yeah, that is. I've had 3 or 4 founders this year approach me about, I'm thinking about an exit in the next few years, and I want to position myself not only for the sale of that business to kind of get that, whatever the private equity multiplier, but then also to position myself for something that's maybe after that. That is something I'm not as familiar with, because at least a lot of the companies I work with are service companies. And a lot of the times where those companies run into problems is the company relies heavily on that founder's network,
Right.
which is a problem when you go to sell a private equity, because that's less valuable. So you can be a very forward-facing founder, but you have to make sure that your business is getting leads, getting reoccurring revenue, clients in from other places, not just off the back of your personal brand. That can be a huge way to grow your business, but it has to be, passing the baton off to other people on your team, building up other just kind of channels there. And that's something I'm not as confident about, building up that kind of funnel,
Yeah.
especially looking for an exit like in a short amount of time.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And trust me, I'm the poster child for never being able to sell their business. That's kind of my act.
Yeah.
Of like,
Like, how do you
we talk
sell
about
this thing?
life
Yeah.
cycle of a business and a founder brand. I'm like, well, there is one stage of the life cycle that how do you handle that one, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The
Nobody-
exit. Come on.
Nobody's written it, and I don't know if you guys, do you know Brent Beshore at all? Do you know that name, or Emily Holdman? I'll make sure they're on your radar. Brent and Emily have a phenomenal company. They actually have a wonderful business book called, I want to say it's The Messy Marketplace. I could be getting that wrong, but look for Beshore and Holdman and you'll find the right book. But The Messy Marketplace is all about kind of like the business side of, you've built this thing and now you're ready to sell it. And it applies to both tangible businesses, but also service-based businesses too. But it's kind of like the whole financial side. There's a little bit into the marketing side of it, but as somebody who serves a lot of clientele in that space personally, I can tell you there's a marketing book and a business book dying to be led there. But since nobody's written that book yet on this call, let's talk about when there's that founder who's actually succeeded in making something, because I think you both see this a lot. There's fortifying the team and fortifying the thing around you, but everybody's always preparing for their next step, the place they want to go. And I feel like, Kit, that's a huge part of what you do. And David, that's a huge part of what you do. Maybe like, and David first, like when you're working with clients or when people hire you, and it's just kind of thinking about like, what are we building this for? I guess that's the question for you. Like, where are we actually going? Great.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't get the where are we going calls all that often. I get the calls that are like, why can't our people see where we're going? Right. Like whether that's a smaller firm. So I work with firms of all sizes. Like I worked with like a 17 person. We worked with the entire company at once firm this year. And I also worked with one of the C-suite level execs at PepsiCo, right? Like all sorts of it. But often it's that there's two sort of, let's call them triggers that get people to start thinking about me, right? The first is if like something like engagement is really low or productivity is really low and hey, our teams aren't performing optimally. How do we fix that, right? But then the other, and this is largely because of a TEDx to TED talk. I still don't understand how that works, but apparently it's on both channels. Talk I gave around purpose is often that disconnection between like, especially when you grow, I think in any company, when you grow larger than everyone works for the founders, right? As soon as there's that middle layer of supervision, you end up a little bit disconnected from where are we going, right? And then the larger you get, the easier it is to get disconnected from that. And what I tell a lot of people is like, it's actually not about reconnecting people to where are we going. It's more about helping them see who is served by the work that we're doing. In other words, like when we get there, who benefits from that? Whose life is made better? Whose work is made better? Some teams that's internal, some teams that's external. Like I work with a lot of different teams and support functions where, hey, if you do a great job, that means these people who actually serve customers can do a great job, right? And so, yeah, it's a little bit less of like answering that, where are we going? And a lot more of why is this still important, even though I'm just one person in a 30,000 person organization? Well, like you and your team still serve a very specific group of people. And maybe as a team, we need to stay focused in on that, right?
Kit, what about that where are we going balance with why can't my people, because you've done a lot of this too, of helping people communicate down. Why aren't my people engaged? Why aren't my people understanding the connection to that mission? How do you think about those problems, those triggers?
I think it's just getting very clear, especially talking with founders or executives. A lot of times they are so close to their own story or the story of the company, but they can't communicate that well. And if people can't understand the like why behind what we are doing or that final mission, it's hard for them to connect and resonate with that. So that's part of the work that we do, is really refining, like, what is it this company is doing? Why did you start it? What does that impact have on the consumer or the greater part of the world? And what does that mean for the business? And I feel like when founders or executives are more empowered to have and hold that narrative that feels like that, not only feels like their own, is their own, they can better communicate that to the key stakeholders on their teams, investors, I don't know, legislators, what have you.
What do you think about that? It's an alignment thing. And I think this connects both to the networking work and the team building work, David, that you've written about. That alignment feels like everything's always just getting out of line and we're always trying to put it back in line. It's the nature of business.
I mean, it's the nature of large organizations for sure, right? I think the number one trigger of misalignment, and this is actually where it's funny as I think about it, Kit, this is actually where your work on a lot of, helping write a lot of content or plan out a lot of content for founders and senior leaders is important. I think a lot of the reason is that like you watch an organization grow and every time something new pops up, you end up with, okay, this is priority one. Well, like not everything can be priority one. By definition, only one thing can be priority one, right? Like I think it was it Greg McEwen that pointed out in Essentialism that like priority used to just be a singular word. And then like 40 or 50 years ago, we made it plural. Like it's a relatively new concept.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so I think a lot of organizations get out of alignment. That probably the biggest reason they get out of alignment is nobody knows what the heck is our first priority, right? This is anecdotal, but like, do you remember, I think it was 2016, you had that famous example of the British rowing team that won the gold because basically the entire training, all they ever asked was, will this make the boat go faster, right? And it was easy. They even skipped the opening ceremony because as a team, they were like, should we go? They're like, well, will it make the boat go faster? No, it won't. Okay, we don't do it, right? We only do things that make the boat go faster. And so as a leader, when you're leading a small organization and everybody's talking to you, it's really easy to do it. When you have a massive organization, it's a lot harder to do. And that's where, again, kind of the genius of making sure certain executives in a senior leadership team are public is what they're posting. I promise you it gets read. I mean, you probably know the analytics, Kid, but I promise you people like inside in a large firm, people inside the organization, the first audience of that post, right? So they always know what's being said. They can better keep aligned because they better know what that actual priority is from the leader's mouth, as opposed to just guessing based on the stuff that comes in the door.
How do you respond to that, Kid? Just leader priorities and communicating those priority. I love that plural thing. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah, I was kind of noodling on that, the fact that word had changed to plural and just kind of
consultants. Has to be management consultants.
Yeah. And just thinking about how in myself with my own business, like that I have multiple, I do like every week I'll have like, these are my top 3 priorities, plural, and how that at the end of the day, it's like, we're going back to the content. What's the one step that I want to take? The final step on this that I need people to go, that is what I'm optimizing for. But if you're optimizing for 3 weekly priorities, you're not optimizing for any of those priorities because it's a balance between all of them. And so I think with, I guess, trying to tie it back to the executives part, like if you don't have a focus on what you're talking about on your channels, that's when you get executives that are inserting themselves into unaligned conversations that are kind of skewing away. That's when you get executives that are deer in headlights that don't know what to post at all. Or when they do show up and post, it is the most stale cracker post that you've ever read. Or it's some random, I saw what everyone else is posting on LinkedIn,
Mm.
LinkedIn-y posts. And that's why you get an echo chamber on LinkedIn of what that kind of content is, because there isn't a good portfolio to look at on what good content can be and should be on that platform as an executive.
Yeah, my least favorite. Well, I have a couple different things I don't like about LinkedIn, which is funny because it's my primary platform. But like
Mine too.
one of my least favorite things is that it shows me what everyone else is talking about. In the top left corner on
Mhm.
desktop, like this
Mhm.
is the news, and you click it, and it's everybody's posts, and you're like, I just feel like it's a good way of knowing what not to talk about, right? Because first of all, if
Mhm.
everybody's talking about it, like you're gonna drown. Like it's already too late. You should have been the first to talk about it. But second
Mhm.
of all, if you start talking about it, like the reason everyone's talking about it is because they're arguing. And so then if you post about it, then they're just arguing with you, right? And like no good can come of that. That's
I'll push back and I'll disagree with that. I'm going to say,
okay.
I'm expecting a
I
take here. Yeah, please.
when you have, and you can stand 10 toes down on something in your industry, again, going back to maybe those content pillars, like I stand on this aligns with what we're talking about content wise. And there is a timely conversation that comes out. So again, looking at that LinkedIn news piece on the side, if you see something that you can overlay your values on into a cultural, into an industry conversation, adding that opinion to it, that doesn't matter because you stand by that. You stand 10 toes down. People can disagree with you, but that does not mean, and it that does not mean anything. And maybe that doesn't even, people can disagree and that also not mean an argument.
David, I think you said something once about how to pick a fight. Can you maybe
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think we're actually that unaligned because the key caveat there is that idea that if it's relevant back to your business,
Exactly. Yeah.
back to what you do. Like I'm
Only if it's relevant. Yeah.
right. And if it's not, then you're just like jumping in
Mhm.
on and then you go back to like, how does this further the goal? Like if your goal is to
Yeah.
get demos, right? Your
Mhm.
goal is also to get demos from the right people. So taking said stand attracts the right
Mhm.
people, repels the wrong people. That's totally fine. That's totally different than like, I almost want to pull up my LinkedIn and see what's trending right now to give you an example of like what not to just jump in on. Right. But I won't do it because I have no idea how to get back to this window.
yeah, we'll be lost forever. That's
Yeah.
inevitable.
But yeah, no, I don't disagree with you on that. If it is,
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that's an example, Matt, of picking a fight. I think it's more of an example of seeing current news through
Yeah.
the fight that you've already picked to be fighting, right?
I like that. Yeah. That's a good way to phrase it.
I'm not opposed to that. I'm opposed to
Mhm.
be like, you don't need to comment unless you, I don't know, unless you work in the travel industry or whatever, you don't need to comment
Mhm.
on who won Survivor this season. Like it's just
Mhm.
not, if you can't figure out an easy way to make it relevant, you're just doing it because LinkedIn said, these are the things
Mhm.
everyone's talking about. And you're going to have great engagement, right?
Mhm.
I don't know that it's the right kind of engagement.
So let's talk about this because I think this is a really interesting part. So now let's talk about picking a fight just for a second. Let's talk about the value of actually having that anti thing, not just the thing you're going for, but the anti thing that helps bind people around it. What's that core idea?
Yeah. So, I mean, really there's, the common misconception, in people who have not read Pick a Fight. And there are a lot more of those people than people who have. Side note, never launch a product with Audible during a global pandemic that destroys everyone's commutes. So they stop listening to audiobooks and podcasts. You won't sell a lot of copies, but one of the few copies you sell will be Matt. So that's great. Thank you.
I'm a safe consumer.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
it.
it's great.
And middle schoolers, presumably, they're going to be all over the Audible
Yeah,
after this.
we're only
That
the right
was
middle
them.
schoolers.
Yeah.
So the idea of how to pick a fight is, first of all, it's not about picking a fight with your competitor. Like nobody who works for Coke is actually all that motivated to destroy Pepsi. Some of them are going to get recruited away by Pepsi, right? But there are certain things that you can stand for as a company that are broader. So I classified them as basically three. So you had what I would call the revolutionary fight, which is, this is something in the industry that we want to change, right?
Mhm.
And if I think about like in the, Matt, I hope you won't pick me apart if I'm categorizing these wrong, but in like the finance world, you have Sally Krawcheck starting Ellevest, and this idea that there's a gender investing gap, that women, even though the majority of women manage their own finances at some point in their life, it still caters to men way too much. And we're going to make a robo-advisor that caters towards females, their level of risk tolerance, their average career trajectories, all of that sort of stuff, right? There very clearly is something wrong in the industry, and we are in our business model taking that on. So that's the revolutionary fight. And the underdog fight is just about being the smaller, newer, faster underdog player. That's the Philly fight. That's why Matt and I get along. Look, our greatest sports hero is a fictional character who loses a boxing match. That's Philadelphia for you. That's everything you need to know. I know he wins in the second one, but he ruins the person. And the beginning of the third one. But it high diagnosis. And then the last one, and it's the one that probably I ended up doing the most work on, is what I would call the ally fight, which is much more that it's actually not about our fight at all. Our customers, our users, our end stakeholders are engaged in a fight for something. Not necessarily against something, but a fight for something. And then we, by existing, aid them in doing that, right? We actually help them with what they're going through and what they're able to do, right? So I kind of categorize, if you can fall into one of those three things, then you've got a really, really motivating. The line I use in the book is that people don't want to join a company, they want to join a crusade. You found a crusade worth attracting people to. And my theory is attracting clients to as well, but I was mostly writing about it from the employee side. So that's the model. I bet you've never heard that model, but you probably are like, oh yeah, I wrote 4 posts that are in that category each in the last 3 weeks, because it all sort of fits in, especially when you have newer companies and you've got founder brands. Almost all of them are starting it for some larger reason than this is profitable, you know?
Mhm.
What do you think about that? Just as a brand strategy, I guess, concept. I love the way it actually buttons together both the idea of positioning and depositioning into the same
Mhm.
aligning statement, but I'm curious how it strikes you, Kit.
I guess I've kind of fallen into this piece where I feel like companies, a lot of time, let's say specifically tech companies, a lot of those tech companies are started by very smart software engineers that create something that's solving a problem. There's not a lot of why behind it. It's just because I can create this thing and I know people will buy it and that's cool, or we'll make a lot of money. But then they hit a point where, or at least what I've noticed when I get kind of brought in, is they hit a point where they can't talk about the value. They don't understand the value themselves, really. And the team doesn't get it either. So there's kind of that unalignment there. And the point with picking fights, I guess, if you don't really understand even where you're fighting, you can't even begin to like enter the ring or stand on anything because you don't really even know what you're standing for. So I think it just goes back to knowing if you're going to have a mission-driven company, or if you are a mission-driven person, knowing what that mission is.
Do you run into that a lot? Do you run into a lot of either founders or people who are just like, I don't actually know what my mission is? Is that a common
Yes.
conversation?
I would say that they won't say it blank out. I don't know what my mission is, but you'd be very surprised to know that a lot of people don't know what their business is or the value, how to communicate the value to people. A lot of those are, again, like these startup founders, or even just startup founders at any kind of a stage. You don't know how to communicate that, or you are talking about it in very technical terms, and your end consumer is not a technical person, and they don't care. Their software is so cool, amazing. They don't care. They want to know what that means for them.
What do you think about that, David?
Yeah, I mean, do they stumble into it over time? Like I can certainly think of, let's use large scale examples. I can certainly think of examples where we created this market and it turns out to be cool, but then there's a crusade inside it. Like if you use like Uber, for example, right? Like wouldn't it be cool if I didn't have to hail a cab? Oh, here's a way to do it. There's this larger crusade of like the established taxi cab industry, and it's correct. It's that. Then of course you have Lyft, who is like, we're not Uber because Uber's evil. So we have our own crusade, right? I think, I wonder if a lot of times you start out, like I worked with a company, sometime in the spring. And they're probably an example of exactly what you're talking about. They're basically just internet connectivity, right? Like they just make sure that if you've got a lot of different sites that all have to be connected to the internet for your point of sale systems to work or what have you, like if you hire us to run all of that, we're going to make sure you never go down, right? Which is just cool, right? But also eventually you start running into client stories of like situations where all heck, there's a hurricane that hits Western Kentucky. This is not a client of theirs. I'm just making one up.
Mhm.
That hits Western Kentucky, and all of a sudden all of the power's out and everybody's flooded or what have you. But we found a way to get it up fastest. And so our clients were this or that. Like, I feel like you sort of, even when you've just got a cool technology, you kind of stumble into usually that ally fight again, but you sort of stumble into, oh my gosh, we really do have that mission and vision. And maybe, so ironically, maybe it's a corporate level version of the individual of like, you just do cool stuff for 10 years and then you look back and you're like, wow, there's a through line, right?
That's what I was going to just say there. I'm like, I think it's a through line of when you look backwards, you can kind of see it's usually, I mean, it starts with a seed, obviously, like, I know, it's just seed funding, that this idea, we see that there's this need in this market, but then every single time you choose to grow your company, you're growing it in a very purposeful way. And you grew it in one direction versus there were maybe 1,000 different directions and choices that you could have made to grow it. But however, those choices that you made, you got to where the company is now. And that was not by accident because of those choices that you intentionally kind of planted. So I think it's looking back, there is a mission, but you just have to uncover what that is to how you got there. And I think that as companies grow too, you're growing and touching more people. So you're growing and touching more employees. You're growing and touching more customers. You're growing and touching more states or places you operate. The story that's kind of coming to mind here that maybe will help illustrate this a bit better is Airbnb. That started where there was just people all coming, and I believe they started in Denver. People coming into a conference in Denver, some people wanted to make money. They literally blew up air mattresses. People can just pay $50 and crash here for like a cheap thing. We all make money. It's fun. We show them around. That's how Airbnb started. That simple idea of let's just host people in our houses. And now it's touching on Airbnb is displacing maybe people, or they're turning into more rental property homes. Airbnb is also great, maybe financial opportunity for some people, or it's revitalizing different communities because they chose to grow their business in that way. They're not just you come to our Denver home and stay on air mattresses. They intentionally chose to grow their business to a global business, what it is now and what it looks like now. They're now touching all those different kind of problems. And that mission is the thing that has to drive through that to make sure that they're staying aligned to the next step that they're going.
Inside of that, do you just feel like a lot of this is just don't totally fall off, don't die, you got to survive?
I think that's just business in general.
Oh yeah, this is business. This is like it's gonna go in a direction, and you just got to not die. And if you just don't die long enough, you can start to look back and then really connect the through lines to actually start to build on that intentionality going forward. Is that a big idea in the center of all this, Kit?
Just don't die.
I'm thinking on that for a bit. Yeah.
This is why I can't write the business book. Yeah. Ask my wife. She has started.
I guess so. I think it goes back to the message that you're saying, the people that you want to connect with, and why. Why are you choosing to share this message? And I think it just goes down to what message you're sharing, why you're choosing to share it, and what you're uncovering from that mission to see. I don't know. I'm getting a little lost in my own thoughts here.
Yeah, it's a heady one. David, what about you?
Yeah.
Besides like just don't die and then reflect on it.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I think this is one of the reasons the disconnect happens as soon as people aren't connected to the founder, right? Once you have a layer of employees, like it's easy for someone to be super excited about their new tech invention or their new whatever. And it's easy to have certain people have that enthusiasm be contagious. But I feel like it's not just don't die. I feel like you better have it figured out by the time you have to bridge that gap to the point where people will be working for our company who don't get to interact with the people who started our company every day. At that point, you probably have to have something to tell them other than, hey, isn't this cool? Like you have to have some reason for it, et cetera. So I don't know that it's just don't die. I think you do have to have it figured out by that point, And if you don't, you should probably hire Kit to help you figure that out. Right. So there you go.
It's great because you're saying it's like this networking threshold of basically as soon as you've gotten a layer removed from not all your people, but the bulk of your people, as soon as that pyramid's kind of inverted, that's when you have to have that story clear, or else it's just going to go completely out of your hands.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And probably have to find a way to communicate that story beyond just one-to-one interactions, because you are not going to be interacting one-to-one with everybody in the organization every day or even every week. And heck, if you're a geographically dispersed company where everybody's working remotely, like, you don't get very many opportunities to remind people why we started this thing. So you better have it clear enough that they can recite it easily by the time you get to that point. Yeah.
All right. I want to get a little bit meta with this one last time before I start to summarize up on this. David started telling us kind of this story about how this whole progression of school and not knowing what he wanted to do exactly, and then everything else, and then the complete flip that takes like 10 years to happen. Kit, you're early on in the career in doing this, just relatively speaking. Do you already have a sense of that first like turning over of focusing? Because it's only been a couple of years now that you've founded your own agency, Seneca. Do I have the name right? Okay. So like you're at the beginning of this phase. Do you even bother to think 10 years forward on this? Or do you just go, I know what works right now and I'm going to keep hammering?
I think for me right now, I've had so much clarity just moving to New York, working with alongside other entrepreneurs, really meeting in person with my clients, partnering with other PR agencies, working under like founding principles. So I've learned a lot about the industry. So for me, it's hard to say what 10 years is going to look like when the past 2 years have looked really different and like that kind of refining things. So I'm looking more short term because I feel like that feels more manageable and actionable. However, I could see larger companies where it's like you have a bigger ship, little changes will, make the big difference versus you're a small, nimble company. You have to stay small and nimble until you have more of that stability. So that's where I kind of feel like I am, if that answers your question.
Well, but here's the prime follow-up question, right?
Okay.
How big do you want Seneca to be? Are we going to get to the point where there's people who work for Seneca that don't get to interact with you all of the time? And do you kind of have to have that figured out before you can scale?
I guess that's a good point. I guess I do see my agency growing. I have a small team right now, a bench of 10 different contractors that I tap for. We work all together on different projects. I would like to see the agency stay around that size. I'd like to service bigger projects, bigger clients, but I don't see it being so big that I'm out of touch with other people on our team. I feel like my mission that I can kind of identify right now is I just want to have fun. So have fun with the clients that I'm working with. I want to do really good, purposeful work that I stand by and I'm just excited about.
What about you, David? Do you think in terms of 10-year plans or any of these things, or do you think more like where Kit is right now?
I'm doing what I want to do professionally for the next 10 years. Like I hit it, right? I had a 10-year plan. I hit it. I think when I make 10-year plans now, they're much more, or 10-year dreams, I should say, they're much more about personal, family life, that sort of stuff, because I've already, and how we fit what I do into that model. I don't know. That said, I started my career with all sorts of intellectual ADHD, so I might run off into some other massive interest, but I don't anticipate it. And I don't anticipate, it's actually very, very similar to you, Kid. I don't anticipate scaling it much more often. I used to joke, I used to have a part-time assistant. She was actually one of my teaching assistants who, when I left the university, was like, can I hire you part-time? And I referred to her as her name is Neha. I referred to her as my chief of staff. And the giant joke was like, part of your job is making sure there is no more staff. Like, it's just me, right? Like, and now we have a bit more of a content team. There's 2 or 3 other folks that help between the YouTube channel and then cutting up all of that and then making that into all of the other content, et cetera. It all spins in this really nice flywheel that probably doesn't scale and get bigger. It just maybe spins faster. So it's a pretty similar dilemma. Like there may be a scenario where some of those contracted people turn into actual full-time employees, but honestly, like, I don't ever want anyone to be on a W-2. So it's just, unless we change a lot of things about the U.S. tax code, I fully support the idea of working with people who have their own entrepreneurial endeavors for what they want to do. And I just happen to be a part of that. Yeah.
What do you think the magic is, David? Stick with me on this for a second. What's the magic of staying small, of choosing that? What does that mean for you and your family?
Yeah, well, there's a delicious irony to the fact that you become one of the world's experts on teams and you don't lead a team yourself.
Yes, there is.
I mean, we do, like, we have teammates, we're just all, everybody, we sync up and then everybody does their own things for like a month, which is why they're contractors and not employees, right? So we don't sync up every day the way they would. Yeah, it's funny. I had a goal for like, I want to do this number of speaking gigs and this much in revenue, et cetera. And that's how I've defined as sort of like, I've arrived. Right. And we hit that. We're one of the few people whose like business exploded because of COVID. Right. And we definitely hit that and we stay in it now. And now I actually see that as like a top line thing, like when we're done with this, I'll work for a little bit. And then an alarm is going to go off on my phone that tells me it's time to walk down the hill to grab my son off the bus. Right. And like, we'll probably still work some stuff into that, but like scaling means not being able to do that. And so I actually really like this kind of governor that it's become. It used to be a goal and now it's a governor to productivity that we actually say no to stuff that exceeds beyond that. Who knows what that'll look like? Like they'll be out of the house in a decade. You mentioned 10-year plan. They'll be out of the house in 10 years. And maybe then it's like, yeah, we're going to start a B2B SaaS company now. Who knows? But in the meantime, I'm not really focused on that. I'm just kind of trying to keep the current thing that we've got spinning and get him off the bus before he has to walk up the hill by himself.
What about you, Kit? How do you think about it? Just the business that you're building and what that means for you and I guess quality of life is just what you want out of it. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I guess it goes back. I like the work that I'm doing. I like doing purposeful work that I'm proud of, that I stand on, and I like having fun. And I think that means that it's smaller, very intimate with my clients, getting to know you well, and just being a part of those teams versus scaling very massively, having a very large team, working with other companies that have massive teams that we're touching maybe just a tiny part of it. The part that I do is I love connecting connecting with people and just help really feeling like I'm doing an impact or having an impact on their business and their team. And I right now, at least, just like having that at the level that we're at.
That is fantastic. I love that both of you are settling there. I have some notes. I'm going to go through these. I want you to freely interrupt me, freely interrupt away. You guys both said some just absolutely wonderful things here. I love that we started off joking about how just network more. The laziest advice that anyone can give a college kid. And so painful. I lost 10 years of my life because I was it was like, oh, you read Dale Carnegie and like all this stuff. And I was like, this feels awful. And none of this worked before. I have a background in music. I was like, I never used any of this crap. How can you tell me that this is suddenly going to work? And I tried so hard and failed miserably until I ran into David's book. And I was like, oh, I get it now. I can do this my own way and it'll still be fine. So we talked about, David, you have a real opportunity here, clearly writing business books for middle schoolers. I'm just going to tell you, don't call it, Tales from the Night Stalker or whatever. Yeah, stay away from that area. But business books for middle schoolers, I can see it now. Kit, I have to ask you, Documentary Now, are you familiar with the parody documentary series?
I'm not, no.
I encourage you next, is Dad still with us? Dad still around?
Dad is still around.
All right. There's a great documentary now. So it's a parody documentary series. They do a thing about trying to bring PBA bowling like back into vogue.
Okay.
And like it's exceptional. My wife and I just watched it.
I'll have to look it up.
So good. And like 22-minute commitment, not a long one. We talked about the just the role of freelancing and building this stuff out on LinkedIn. So Kit, I think this is really interesting. Your business didn't really exist 5 years ago, right?
No, it's when I just kind of got started.
And you transitioned from, you said like Instagram, social media stuff into, hey, can you do this over here on LinkedIn? Is that how that happened?
Yep. That is how that happens.
And it happened because somebody else said, you're doing this really well. Could you also do it over here?
I was doing her Instagram and she also was starting to build a presence on LinkedIn, asked if I did LinkedIn. I said yes. A mentor was like, you should lean into LinkedIn. And then I just kind of updated my headline to, I'm a LinkedIn content creator when nobody was doing that on the platform. And then I was reached out to that was the first marketing agency that I got wrapped into working with. They're based in the UK. And I wrote for several C-level executives at a Fortune 500 company, their LinkedIn content.
David, did you have something similar happen as you started writing and taking the teaching stuff out into the world where you were like, I know this works. Then people were like, come work for us?
No. Sort of. What really stood out to me from hearing that was that I've always been intentional about looking for white space or blue ocean, to use the strategy book term, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I always joke that we started a podcast before it was cool. And I mean that 2010, like we used to have people call into a conference call line because it would record if you hit *2, and then it would email me the MP3 file. And then I would
Wow.
take a GarageBand, upload it with CyberDuck to our WordPress website. And that was our podcast. Now, like, I mean, when Matt's done pushing record, he'll press publish, and then like, that's it. The whole thing's done. Right. So it was a lot harder. And then we did that for a number of years, and then switched over in 2018 to YouTube because of said empty space. I was like, hey, there's not enough here. Now I might have guessed that one wrong, because like I probably should have been writing more content on LinkedIn because it was about to blow up too. But it was still about kind of looking for that empty space. And that's the cool thing about it happened accidentally, but also your intuition was like, whoa, there's a massive opportunity over here that's only just sort of starting. And I think that part's really cool, right? Is looking for that empty white space,
Were you aware of how big the opportunity was though, Kit? Or was it just like the demand just kind of surprised you and you didn't say no?
Yeah, I was like, I think a through line that I'm seeing through our conversation is just following your interest in that next step. And the interest is kind of those pieces. So I just was following my interest of I like Instagram, Facebook content creating. It led me to LinkedIn. Then I saw the opportunity there really when I got hired on by this marketing agency. And that was the first time we're like, oh, this pay is pretty decent. And I'm working for some pretty high level people. And nobody else is really doing this. So I should just kind of like heads down, lean into this. And now because of that, I'm in the position I am in now, but I'm sure today following interests in other ways that I will look back on in a few years and say, oh, well, it's because I was looking at just following what was my interest of this time now.
But it's also that nobody else is doing this piece, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I was in podcasting, and it was like, hey, there's like 3 YouTube channels about leadership in the globe.
Wow.
And it could be because there's only like 20,000 people that want to watch YouTube videos about leadership out there. But it was also just like, hey, there's nobody doing this. Why don't we do this then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And see what happens, see who shows up, because sometimes I think when we send something within our own curiosity, we can be really surprised who else is curious about the thing.
Yeah.
Dylan O'Sullivan, who's on one of these episodes that actually just came out, and I found him because he was just tweeting existential philosophy quotes and random Norm Macdonald references. And I'm like, you are the Venn diagram.
Which
way too much.
Perfect pair. Yeah.
It's a perfect pair. And he would just double back and forth more or less between these two tracks. And now, 80,000 Twitter followers later and regular, retweets from giant accounts. It's like, who would have thought?
Mm-hmm.
Which ties to, David, the thing that you said, which I wrote down. I love this as just a sentiment. That how do you look backwards, forwards? Kit, the expression that you then tied that to was knowing your business, but then also, and I want to clarify this, knowing their personal timeline. So like you understand the business thing, but you then also understand the person who started that business beyond the scope of that business. Did I catch that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's this person founded this business. That's marking a start point for that business. But that business didn't start at that start point. It really started when the founder kind of had these ideas. Where did those ideas come from? What were those lessons? What were the inspiration to get us to the start line? And then for the start line, that's usually bringing on other team members, or it's going to take a different shape, or that founder is going to have new learnings, and it's going to create something different from there.
David, what do you think about that, kind of reconnecting to that story? Because that seems to be one of those things as a company scales, that kind of gets lost sometimes. We don't remember this about the founders, or the newest employee doesn't even know it about the founders.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And again, I think that's to me as a not a marketing person or organizational psychologist, that's where I see the real value in what Kit does, right? Is that it's the employees who are also reading this. It's not just prospective clients. It's a way to create these kind of cultural artifacts, if you will, right? And it's not surprising at some point, usually in a large organization, when the actual founder is sort of getting ready to retirement, you start to see these little, museum display pieces, our founding story and blah, blah, blah. But like, that's almost too late to do it. And it's probably a better idea to document that a lot sooner.
Tell the stories of it a lot sooner. Like you need to be fortifying, I think, and clarify this, David, like you need to clarify that emotional connection to those things. Cause you gotta rebuild that brand loyalty to borrow like the Disney thing. Like the parents have to show the kids Star Wars and Mickey and whatever else, or else kids aren't going to care.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
it's again, to go back to it, like when, a kid was saying, our start date is kind of when you bring on somebody else, et cetera. You didn't necessarily have to do it then because were still there to tell the person one-on-one, here's why we're starting this thing, et cetera. But once you
Mhm.
get to, once you have a span of control past, 7, 8, 10 people, and you have to start adding layers in, once you start posting on indeed.com and whatever, like people are applying because the salary is good, the location's nice, and you said you were remote, right? Like that's why they're applying. They're not applying for that founding story. So you have to make sure that they hear it and still want to be a part of it, So you've got to have it clear by that point. Yeah.
Mhm.
Kit, I love the point you made, and I wrote this one down as a direct quote too. I think you referred to them as stale cracker posts, which
Yeah.
I
You
know
know exactly. Yeah.
exactly what you said in that.
They
3,
often start with the phrase, I'm excited to,
oh
Yep.
and
man,
then it just goes downhill
And
from
a
there.
very unexciting post follows.
Yeah. Yeah.
we talked about how a lot of people don't know what their mission is, how to communicate it, and I think from inside of a company, that really means just not only understanding, but understand what the people around you talk about. We're recording this in December. It'll come out in January. We're in annual planning season. Lots of companies are doing that. Let's cap off the year end. Let's tee up next year. And how many of those conversations are probably not fully around what's the mission and how do we actually communicate it to everybody else? And I got to ask you this. This will be the last question for you directly here. Small Giants by Bo Burlingham. Do you guys know that book?
Mhm.
Run into that one?
I've not
No.
heard.
Kit, I
Yeah,
think
read
you'll
it when I was
appreciate it.
13.
Okay.
Yeah. Little school read for you. Excellent.
Yeah.
A great book about building things that you're not building them to scale, which
Mhm.
may not help you with
Mhm.
any of the tech executive stuff, but it's really a profound
Mhm.
way of thinking about when you're focusing on community and culture. Actually, David, last thing, I got to give you this one. Doing the 10-year planning, but being aware enough of your own ADHD that you can take it back to what I want for life. I
Yeah.
think that is a huge one for people. So I'm going to ask you first, David. I wrote down on this card what I think you and Kit have in common. What do you think? Do you have any guesses at what I might have written down before we pressed record today? It's more of a vibe thing. It's not like a singular
Yeah, I mean,
word.
there's definitely a vibe. I would say I think we're both really, really interested in getting that driving motivational story behind why an organization is, right? And we do, what's funny is we come at it from two different sides. Kid, it sounds like most of your interest is so that we can attract investment dollars or clients to it, or
Mhm.
you. And I want it so that that employees still stay engaged and feel like they've got a great place to work because they're tied into it. That's probably not on the card. It probably has something to do with who knows what, right?
All right. Well,
But
we're not
Mhm.
we're not
that's my guess.
spoiling it. We're not spoiling it.
Yeah,
It's a great guess.
yeah.
Kit, what about you? Do you have a guess what's
Ready
on
to
the
be
back of
wrong.
this?
Yeah, I guess listening. I mean, it's what's awesome about this podcast, but also hard because like I haven't done research on David's work, which is from the kind of the conversation here. It sounds like there's a lot of just knowing the mission, like communicating that, connecting with different kind of stakeholders. That was kind of through line I saw in this conversation. I'd say probably something around there with sharing brand stories, maybe, or connecting, networking. I don't know.
No, you guys both get points. You more or less figured out. I said leading ourselves and our networks into the futures that we actually want.
Yeah.
And I think that's the
Okay.
key here. It's the things we actually want, not the thing that the LinkedIn algorithm says we want, not the thing that the business book says we should want, but actually getting to the core of what we actually want. And I see both of you out in the world embodying that message. And, I'm here applauding both your stuff. David Burkus, do us a favor. Tell the people where they can find you if they want to learn more.
Yeah, well, I'm going to assume that if they've listened for this long, they probably do want to learn more, right? So
Safe to assume.
I'm really fortunate. Burkus is a really weird last name. There's not a lot of us, which means all the usernames and domains are open. So if you want to make that davidburkus.com, that's the easiest way to do it. But if you also just type that into Google, like you'll find me and then you'll find all of the Burke references that Matt had in the intro, but those will point back to me as well. So whatever platform you then want to connect on, we're there and we're keeping this conversation going. So please do.
Awesome. Kit, what about you? Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, just Kit Huffman. So Huffman. That can get a little tricky sometimes for people. Feel free to connect with me, say that you heard on the podcast. Love just kind of connecting with other people there. You can also see my capabilities deck on the website if you're interested in any of those services, and happy to chat more on that platform there.
I want to thank you guys both so much for coming out. This is Just Press Record. One more episode in the books. Here we go, 2025, and we are out. Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Zeigler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.